Hello, government students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 9, Section 3, Commander in Chief and Chief Diplomat. So, my question to you is what makes a great president? And there have been people over the years that have said, there are some of the greatest presidents in the world. Matter of fact, probably one of the greatest presidents when you talk about people who have been surveyed or polled over the years isn't even on your screen. That would be George Washington. Others might find maybe Abraham Lincoln a great president, who's, by the way, one of my favorites, or Harry S. Truman, who's my ultimate favorite president. But these guys that you see here are some of those who come up really high in the rankings. We have Thomas Jefferson, a man known for his writing, his Declaration of Independence, and maybe bringing us the Louisiana Purchase. You got Theodore Roosevelt, who went after the big monopolies of his time. He was a trust buster. He also was kind of an imperialistic kind of fella. And then you got FDR, who a lot of people look at as a calming force for our nation through the times of the Great Depression and World War II. But for the most part, it all comes down to leadership. And so what we're going to look at are the qualities and skills that make for an effective leader. And granted, some of these might vary from president to president. Some of the things that do resonate for all is whether or not a president understands their public. They understand the people. Okay, presidents have to try to tap into the mood of the people and use that mood to their benefit. So if you're looking at guys like FDR, I mean, he was able to do that with his fireside chats. Other skills, being able to communicate. A president who can express their policies clearly and inspire the public, get support for those programs that they're really trying to champion will probably be well received by the people in Congress. When we look at Ronald Reagan, he was kind of nicknamed the great communicator. And part of that was that ability to kind of get before the public and to be relaxed and to basically, show a certain amount of confidence that he believed that our nation was going to be great. Some people might say, in this day and age with Donald Trump being able to use things like tweets, gets his point of view across, and he's speaking directly to the people through that medium. Aside from communicating, sense of timing. This idea of knowing when is the right time to introduce policies. Having a sense of timing is good for anyone. I mean, it's kind of like, being able to know when to ask your teacher for permission to leave the room, or knowing when to ask your parents if you could get, maybe some cash from them. But presidents have to know when is the right time. Abraham Lincoln was pretty good with this, but he had to rely a little bit on his cabinet. He wanted to introduce the Emancipation Proclamation early on in his presidency, but he didn't have a real good victory in the Civil War to back that up, and his cabinet, for the most part, encouraged him to wait until at least they had something positive that they could basically lean upon to introduce this idea of emancipation. And it worked by waiting it out. Openness to new ideas. This idea is a president flexible enough to seek new solutions to the problems that we're kind of facing. And sometimes that's a gamble because you're not necessarily always going to succeed with some of these. Along with that, the ability to compromise. We're going to work with Congress, especially a Congress that might not necessarily be of the same political party. You really have to be able to negotiate. Can you accept part of what you want rather than the whole thing? If you're willing to take a little with hopes that maybe this would open the door to maybe other compromises, that's the art of compromise. And then finally, political courage. Do you have the courage to make unpopular decisions and to alienate not only yourself, but alienate yourself from Congress or the people in order to do what is right? Some presidents are more interested in those political pollsters being popular within the public, and hence they don't necessarily do anything. So these are the qualities and skills of an effective leader. Sometimes presidents who have been very, very effective, uh, you know, looking back in history, are not necessarily all that loved when they are in the White House. I look at Abraham Lincoln. He certainly was criticized left and right by just about anybody. I mean, obviously, those people who were living in the Confederacy really didn't love him, but even in the North, there were a lot of people that didn't like what Lincoln was doing. And yet, we look back in time, and Abraham Lincoln is probably one of the most beloved presidents in our American history. So, you have that courage, and certainly there are some that do and some that don't. As commander in chief and chief diplomat, uh, for the most part, commander in chief as a civilian commander, they're kind of the head of the military, and they are expected to help defend the nation, engage in overseas operations. They control serious turmoil in the U.S. So if we would ever have riots or maybe a really bad natural disaster where we need security so we can prevent looting and such, the president may call the military up for that. And again, aiding in natural disasters that are happening here and even sometimes abroad. As chief diplomat, they direct U.S. foreign policy. They make decisions about the U.S. relations with other countries. They negotiate and sign treaties. And we've seen a lot of this in more recent years when we talk about renegotiating, like NAFTA for President Trump. Signing executive agreements with other countries, and then finally recognizing foreign governments. One of the first leaders of the world to recognize the existence of the nation of Israel was the United States. It was the Truman administration. And part of that came from one of Truman's very close and personal friends who was Jewish, who really pleaded with him that he needed to do this for our nation. And certainly that has developed into a very good friendship between the United States and the nation of Israel. All right. Number one here, presidents receive special treatment. This situation can cause them to become a little more isolated in issues because staffers have a tendency to tell presidents what they want to hear. And number two, presidential staffers find it difficult to tell their boss bad news. The presidential advisors revealed his strategy for imparting bad news to the president. And by the way, this was President Wilson. Because he would always be present whenever there was good news to be given, and he would make sure he was absent when the bad news comes. I would hope that President Wilson probably figured this out before he left the White House. Anyway, and number three, not only do top staffers have easy access to the president, they can also use his closeness to control other people's access. This has happened during times of the Reagan administration and going back to the Nixon administration. And number four, presidents sometimes have to use the tactic of executive privilege. And that basically means that the president has the right to refuse to testify for or provide information to Congress or to a court. When you go back and you look at the Watergate scandal, there's a big issue there with executive privilege in the Nixon White House. And then presidents have long claimed that executive privilege protects their communication with others in the executive branch, and it is necessary if they want to get frank opinions and advice from their assistants. So all of that is incredibly important. Thank you very much.